Cheers, guys. Epix 911. Welcome to the Elitist Geek VR news for August 20th, Saturday. Let's get started. Didn't get that headphone evaluation video up. It will come up today. Wasn't quite happy with it because of the lighting levels. It was really awkward when I was pointing at stuff to see it clearly. So we're going to get that up today because I've got some daylight going on. No, I'm not having beer at 10 a.m. I assure you, it is squarely into the late afternoon here in Vancouver time. Let's get on to the news, guys. So the first news piece deals with Chinese company called Xiaomoi. And Xiaomoi spelled Xiamoi. And I have that pronunciation on good authority from a Mandarin speaker at my office. So hopefully I didn't butcher that too much. But Xiaomoi is hinting at a more sophisticated virtual reality headset for future releases. Now, they had one of their vice presidents, Hugo Barra. He's their vice president of international sales, and he was talking about the unit and talking about the reality of the Chinese market. What makes it, or what makes his company so sure that not only can they deliver a more sophisticated VR set, but that there's people who are actually willing to buy it. And he had some interesting statistics. Now, I didn't dig into these too far, but just on the surface, one of the things he talked about was the millions of various smartphone brands that most of which are VR capable are sold in China annually. Like just this last year, millions have been sold. So if that's true and they take the Google Daydream, the Gear VR, Oculus, Samsung approach to, having the phone power the mobile solution, then yeah, there's probably some weight to that statement, right? That they could do that. What it doesn't resolve is how much disposable income this growing middle class actually has, right? It's one thing to buy a cell phone. A lot of times you purchase a cell phone through work, right? It's offered to you at work. It's not something you may be able to afford in China had you not worked for that employer. So that's the big question. So if it follows suit and you say, okay, look, it's got X number of sales of phones, therefore that's going to equal X number. But I don't think you can do that, right? That's a bit of a fallacy to say that, just because one sold doesn't necessarily mean another will. The real indicator will be actual results. How many VR units are they going to be able to sell? And I've already been convinced that the arcade style VR is going to work in China. I think that's going to work very well. I think it's going to be very popular in Japan as well because of the disposable income question, right? So in order to start selling these to consumers for an in-home solution, that formula would need to change a little bit, and I'm not convinced of that. So we'll find out this year how these things sell to Chinese consumers in this growing middle class. There's a game called DriveClub for Sony. It was released in 2014 and developed by Evolution Studios, a company which went out of business earlier this year. Well, it turns out that the game is being worked on for a virtual reality release by Sony directly. And it's going to offer some cool features, online multiplayer virtual reality, 5 additional urban tracks, 80 plus cars, and they actually touted this as a feature, cruise control. So I don't know how important that is to you guys. Cruise control is kind of one of those things that everybody has in their car, but most people never frickin' use because you don't have massive long stretches of freeway where you could benefit from that. You're usually commuting to work and you're stuck in frickin' traffic, right? But on a holiday trip, sure, you can probably do that, put it on cruise control, but it's not something that gets used very often, so we shall see. But that is going to not make it for launch in October, but likely the holidays. They plan on having it released later this calendar year, but not timed to coincide with launch October 13th. Another preview game is a game called Alice VR. Now, personally, I think this looks kind of cool. I'm a big geek for science fiction games. I like puzzle games too. You mix the two, you probably have a pretty decent game. Now, this thing borrows, as the title would suggest, very heavily from historical Alice in Wonderland, right? The old Mad Hatter, White Rabbit, and Timepiece for being late. So take the blue pill, take the red pill, etc., etc. That kind of psychedelic gameplay style is probably going to figure into this one a little bit. So they've got 3 sets of levels right now, and they're billing them as non-sequential, so you could probably enter them in different ways, right? Different intervals. One is a cityscape, the other is desert, and the third is an underground setting. And all kinds of cool puzzles on here, gravitational puzzles, puzzles where you're upside down and everything else isn't. So there's some mind-bending stuff in there. That should be pretty cool, and that's what I want to see. But what stood out for me most with this title was a comment at the very end from a reader, which was, "Thank you for having the balls." And I'm going to get the exact quote. Here it is. "Thanks for having the balls to support smooth artificial locomotion." I would agree, because that is something that so many other companies are shying away from, and I just don't get why. I understand some of you are susceptible to nausea. That smooth motion makes you sick. Absolutely. And that's why I've said it before, and I'll say it again. VR games should always, at a minimum, offer 2 forms of locomotion. Have smooth locomotion for those like me that don't get sick and enjoy that, and have an alternative form of locomotion for the people that are susceptible to nausea, etc. I think that only makes sense. Like, virtual reality is going to be so subjective anyways, movement-wise. You should, at a minimum, offer 2 forms. And I always harp back on this game, but it's because I think they got it right, at least to the extent that they offer variety, and that's the Solace Project. They offer multiple forms of locomotion. Didn't seem to have added much significantly to their development time, but as the game player of the game, gives you the ability to try different things and find something that works for you. I did in that game. Many others did as well. So that's personally the direction I think games should go, and it's nice to see that this Alice VR game is doing exactly that, bucking the trend of not including smooth movement and going with it, because, again, I personally love it. There was a game I tried yesterday, Ark Evolved, I think it's called. It's a survival type game. Anyways, it supports Rift smooth movement, and I loved the movement. It was fantastic. And if Sony PSVR does that for the majority of its games, which it seems to be doing, and can prove there's a market for that, again, as long as they cater to those of you who can't handle that, right, then I think it's going to be win-win, and hopefully PC devs are going to follow suit, and we're going to see more of that, because personally, I think that's the way to go. Next article deals with the Bigscreen. Now, I didn't mention this yesterday. I was going to, but I had a lot of other things to talk about, so it kind of got dropped. But Bigscreen is a social VR app, and it's going to launch on Oculus Home, bringing custom avatars and some other updates. Now, it's, like I said, a social app, and it launched on Steam back at the end of April. So here we are, Oculus Home support, crossplay, and something it had always offered is Rift through Steam was supported essentially from launch. So the fact that they're crossplay shouldn't be too surprising, kind of makes sense. And again, that's something that I hope other devs, if the development funds and time is there, is something that they can do as well, because crossplay is just going to benefit both sides, right? Now, there's a puzzle game that I tried called Esper 2 for the Oculus Rift, and I've been meaning to release a video on it. I had a lot of fun playing the game. It's a puzzle game, kind of like a little bit of Portal, a little bit of something else that I can't quite put my thumb on, but I had a lot of fun playing it. Anyways, the original game had never made the conversion from Gear VR to Oculus. Apparently that is now going to happen. Sometime in September, it's going to be launched and it will be available. The dev is Coatsinks, and it's probably one I'm going to pick up. I liked Esper 2. It didn't cost me an arm and a leg, and it was fun. And at the end of the day, that's all I want from VR. And I never really got into this, but that Wrath of the Fire God game, I've really been enjoying that. Had my buddy try it yesterday, and he just loved the game. He actually finished it on easy, his first playthrough. So it's a shame that there's not more content, but it manages to provide an original slant. And the best way I can describe it to people is, imagine Pirates of the Caribbean, but instead of being a ride that you just sit and watch the scenery go by, right? You interact with it violently via guns. That's what this game does. Mind you, it's bow and arrows, but it's still got that violent element. And it just feels completely different than something like raw data, which I like every bit as much, but in a different way. And they feel different, even though essentially they're the same type of game. And that is just, again, one of the benefits of virtual reality, right? Different ways to experience tired old genres. The European convention, Gamescom, is showing one thing very, very clearly, and that is that VR is not just a big North American thing or Asian thing or European thing, but it's a worldwide hit. There are South American companies here, companies from other countries as well, showcasing virtual reality demonstrations, games, peripherals, all kinds of cool virtual reality based items. And this is the first Gamescom where VR has been this diverse. So the release of virtual reality this year has definitely had an impact, and that momentum is only going to be sustained, I think, by Sony, kicked up a few notches by Sony, and the results of all this development that you, me, and everyone else who was an early adopter is waiting patiently, albeit some of us are losing our patience based on some of your feedback, which I totally get, but I think the calls, the patience will start to get answered as we make this swing into the holiday season, and I can't wait. Now, we've talked about the Oculus Touch several times on this channel, and one of the VPs had an opportunity to talk about Roomscale VR, and the company line has been from day one, yeah, we could do Roomscale, but we're not sure how important that is. Yeah, but we can do it. And it's funny that they have that public-facing kind of, yeah, you know, they're not super keen on it. They seem to be kind of dismissive of it, right? But look, the reality is people like myself have purchased the Vive in big numbers almost exclusively because of the Room VR. Granted, there's other reasons, but I would say it's safe to say that the overwhelming reason somebody would pick the Vive over the Rift 8 times out of 10, whatever that statistic is because of Roomscale VR. Bottom line, that was my reason. I've heard from many of you that was your reason for it. Roomscale VR is enough of a separate, different experience to warrant being part of what we want to experience as VR early adopters, right? It's the reason I bought both. I wanted to participate in Roomscale VR. All right, so that's kind of the public face of Oculus. But if we dig a little deeper, how do they really feel about Roomscale? Well, let's look at some of the evidence. If we look at some of the firmware software updates, like the update that was made to Oculus Home, I think just about 3-4 weeks ago, that added multi-camera support. The main reason that was done? Roomscale VR. Whether they want to admit it or not, whether they want to sound dismissive or not, it's something they are taking note of because one of their competitors has used that as a differentiator, right? Something that sets themselves apart from Rift in an otherwise very same setup, right? Apples to apples in so many different ways. Granted, there's some lens differences, and we've explored some of those. There's some comfort, there's weight, bulkiness. There are other factors, but Roomscale was the main differentiator, right? So here they are. They've added multiple camera support, right? They've made changes to the Oculus Touch that would suggest use in Roomscale, whether it's the magnetic edition, whether it's, some of the gesture enhancements that they've made. These are all things that seem to indicate that this is an area that they are going to be fully compatible in, right? You can't really blame them. I mean, at the end of the day, nobody wants to be told, I told you so, right? No. It would make them look as if they had completely missed the ball on Roomscale VR by not even factoring that in. So by sticking to the line of, yeah, it can do it, but we're not sure how important that actually is going to be for people, they never have to confront that, right? That I told you so. And to me, personally, just my opinion, that's the bottom line for these guys. Some of them may actually believe it, that Roomscale VR isn't important. And I've heard from some of you, Roomscale VR isn't important. Fair enough, right? When I use my Rift, granted, a lot of the games that I enjoy on the Rift aren't Roomscale games, and I enjoy them just as much, if not more, on the Rift. Case in point, Elite Dangerous, right? But then there's other stuff that I play, like Wrath of the Fire God, where you just could not have that same experience on the Oculus Rift. Being able to sidestep only just would not give that game the depth or raw data that it currently has, where you can literally use the space available to you to dodge, duck, move, right? Yeah, it gets into that whole conversation, how much do you want to move? Well, when you do want to, you can, and that's the main point, right? So, no, it doesn't surprise me that they are towing that familiar tired line, but I understand why they're doing it, and in my opinion, that's the reason. So, last thing that I wanted to touch on has to do with a question that an author from Upload VR asked from his readers. And I would ask the same question of you guys, the viewers, just as a discussion point. Is virtual reality too expensive? Is the question. And hear me out on this just for a sec, guys, because I'm going to play that old card that I played quite a bit. And I don't ever play this card to sound like I'm some expert or know-it-all, because I'm not. You guys correct me on a lot of things. You guys make me aware of things I didn't know. I'm definitely no expert. I like to consider myself a jack of all trades, master of absolutely none. That's who I am, right? But one thing being an older gamer has provided me with is experience, right? I have experienced a whole bunch of crap that I see repeat constantly. And if you're part of the millennial generation, you just haven't experienced that and seen it, right? So when this question gets asked, is virtual reality too expensive? For somebody like me, I compare it to what's come before. And what has come before for me? Well, my favorite computer of all time, I've never been shy about this. I wear the Commodore logo on my sleeve like a spiritual tattoo, is the Commodore 64. Easily my favorite computer of all time. Second to that, the Commodore Amiga. This is an important company to me in my life, right? When I saved up for my original Commodore 64, I was a paper boy. It took me 18 months to save up for the Commodore 64, disk drive, and enough blanks to pirate a shoebox full of games. Yeah, I went that direction back then. But don't judge me on that. Hear me out. That was $850 in 1985 dollars, right? That would be almost $2,000 in today's money. I was a 13-year-old kid in 1985 who wanted a Commodore 64 so bad, I woke up every single day fantasizing about it, tasting it, wanting it, until I could make that a reality. And for 18 months, I was patient, squirreling money away. So to me, that's not a valid question, and I don't buy that as an argument. If a 13-year-old kid in 1985 having a paper route could make his dream come true of the computer he wanted, which in today's dollars is way more expensive than a virtual reality unit would be, then no, I don't buy that at all. And you can just look at other things. I've had a video specifically on this topic before, and it's to do with the cost of video games. Video games in the 80s were roughly $60. Video games today are roughly $60 on average, right? If you take the average between like a Steam $49 game and a PS4 $69, $79 game, that's kind of where you come out as an average, right? Well, $60 in 1985 would be the equivalent of about $130 to $140. Kids were buying games back then. Granted, I pirated a hell of a lot of them, I admit that. But I did buy the odd original game, right? Games are not that expensive today. They are, by comparison, they've become cheaper and more affordable for people to purchase, right? Game consoles, computers, same thing. An Apple II computer would be the equivalent of almost $5,000 today. And people bought those things in droves, the Apple II, right? So no, they are definitely more expensive. But the underlying question, are they too expensive? No, I think they are exactly as expensive as they need to be for the technology that at this point in time. And it's only going to get more affordable as time goes on. But that's my opinion. Love to know what you guys think. As always, let me know in the comments below. And I will have that headphone video up shortly. I'm going to be working on that next, doing some retakes. As always, guys, cheers, and we will see you on the flip side.